My head was pounding with a relentless rhythm, my throat raw and burning as if I'd swallowed a mouthful of jagged stones. "Mom, are you still not getting up? What are we supposed to eat?" His words, laced with irritation, stabbed straight into my chest. I forced myself upright a little, swallowing against the fire in my throat. "There's stew from yesterday," I managed, my voice a raspy whisper. "Just heat it up, it's already made." Before I could even finish, Chloe's voice tore through the closed bedroom door, sharp and scathing, carrying the full weight of her resentment. "I've been married into this family for 8 years. When have you ever not taken care of everything? And now you catch a little cold and just give up." A dramatic pause, heavy with unspoken accusation. "I'm going to my mum's. At least I can eat in peace there." Bang! The front door slammed so hard, the old windows shuddered in their frames, rattling in protest. I lay back down, my limbs cold as ice, but my chest burning with a deep internal heat, as if a knife had been heated and pressed into my ribs. She had walked out in a rage because I hadn't cooked for one day, and my son, David, just stood there in the kitchen doorway, his face dark and stormy, his eyes filled with blame and irritation, as if I was the one deliberately ruining their day, their perfect routine. "Why do you have to go and piss her off?" he muttered coldly, his voice low but cutting, then turned away, disappearing into the hallway without even a glance at the messy kitchen he'd left behind. I couldn't speak. My throat felt locked up, choked with a mix of illness, cotton, and shame. For 8 years, ever since their wedding day, I had been wound up like a clock, a tireless machine dedicated to their comfort, never once letting a meal go cold on the table. Up before the sun every morning, cooking breakfast, scrubbing floors until my knees ached, folding their laundry with meticulous care. I even washed David's delicate work shirts and Chloe's sweaters by hand, fearing the machine would ruin them. When Chloe was pregnant, I hovered like a nursemaid, staying up at night making nourishing bone broth, more attentive, it often felt, than her own mother. After Leo was born, the moment I heard a whimper, I would jump up, rocking that child gently before they even fully stirred, scared to death of disturbing David and Chloe's sleep. My life had become a blur of service, a constant state of anticipating their needs. But now, because I was sick for a single day, because the machine had momentarily faltered, I had become an inconvenience, a burden. I shut my eyes, the raw exhaustion pulling me down. My chest tightened, a familiar ache, and my nose stung as the tears came, quiet and hot, slipping down my cheeks without a sound, lost in the fabric of the pillow. My name is Martha Adams. I'm 65 years old, and I live in the quiet, if somewhat damp town of Oak Haven, known locally for its old ceramics factory, where my husband and I both worked for decades. We weren't wealthy, but we scraped together enough to send our son, David, to community college, dreaming of a better future for him. After my husband passed away 15 years ago, it was just me, holding things down, keeping the pieces of our life together. 8 years ago, David brought Chloe home. She was beautiful, stylish, with an air of effortless grace that intimidated me. He told me they were getting married. David was doing well enough in his job then, but they were young, just starting out. I emptied my life savings, money I'd painstakingly saved over 30 years, about $30,000, to contribute to their down payment on this house. I even borrowed money from friends to cover unexpected renovations the place needed and paid for most of their wedding, wanting them to start their life together without debt. I thought they'd be grateful. I truly did. But it didn't take long to realize I hadn't bought myself gratitude. I had simply become a living maid who worked for free, an extension of the house's amenities. Every morning, without fail, I was the first one up, puttering in the kitchen to cook breakfast before David left for work. Every night, I had dinner ready and warm on the table the moment they walked in. When they decided to have a child, I was there for everything. Every pediatrician appointment, every diaper change, every late-night cry. If little Leo wet the bed at night, I was the one up washing the sheets, sometimes twice a night. I never complained. I swallowed my exhaustion, my own needs, believing this was what mothers, what grandmothers were supposed to do. Chloe grew used to it, naturally assuming my service. She stopped lifting a finger around the house. She wouldn't even wash her own clothes anymore, just tossed them into the laundry basket, expecting them to magically appear clean, ironed, and folded back in her drawers. David never said a word to her about it. He seemed to think this was the natural order of things too, or perhaps he simply didn't want to rock the boat. I did try to push back, to speak up for myself, a few times over the years, but each attempt was met with resistance or dismissal. I remember one particularly cold winter night. Leo had a high fever that wouldn't break. I rushed him to the emergency room and sat there all night in uncomfortable plastic chairs, holding his sweaty little hand while the machines beeped and buzzed around us. When we finally got home in the morning, exhausted and emotionally drained, I collapsed on the living room couch, coat still on, and fell instantly asleep. When I woke up a few hours later, Chloe was standing in the living room, dressed impeccably, holding a cup of coffee, with a look on her face that could crack Oakhaven granite. "Seriously, Mom, you didn't clean up?" she demanded, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Look at this place. What a disaster." She jabbed her finger toward a few empty snack wrappers and a discarded magazine on the coffee table, as if I had just single-handedly ruined her life, her carefully ordered world. My throat tightened, the memory of the ER visit, the fear for Leo, the sheer exhaustion flooding back. I took Leo to the ER last night," I explained, barely above a whisper. "I was just too exhausted. Maybe it's time you helped out a bit too." The words felt brave, a small, trembling step onto new ground. She rolled her eyes, a dismissive gesture that sliced through my fragile courage, and gave a bitter laugh. "Oh, please. David and I work all day. If we all stopped doing things just because we were tired, we'd never eat, would we?" And with that, she shot me a glare, filled with unspoken contempt, and stormed back to her room, slamming the door behind her. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached, a dull, throbbing pain that matched the ache in my chest. My fists curled so tight my nails dug into my palms, leaving angry red crescents. But in the end, I didn't argue, I didn't shout back. I just got up, my body aching, and started picking up the trash, scrubbing the one dish in the sink. That day, I learned a hard lesson. It was easier to shut my mouth, to swallow it all down, and keep quiet, to become invisible again. But today, something inside me had finally snapped. I had a fever that burned through my veins, a sore throat that felt like barbed wire scraping with every swallow. My whole body ached as if I'd been wrung out like an old dishcloth. I just wanted one day, just one, to rest, to simply be without a demand, without an expectation, and even that was too much to ask. When I heard Chloe shuffle in, her slippers smacking softly against the tile floor, she gave me a slow once-over, her gaze assessing, critical. "Didn't you say you were too sick to move yesterday?" she asked, her tone implying disbelief, judgment. I didn't answer. I just placed the clean lid on the pot and reached into the fridge for a few potatoes, my movements deliberate. She grabbed a cup of coffee off the counter, her new phone already in her hand, and tossed another line over her shoulder, a casual command wrapped in indifference. "Better clean up those toys in the living room before Leo comes down for breakfast." After she left the kitchen, the sound of her slippers fading down the hall, I closed the kitchen door behind me. On the counter sat a familiar pile of receipts, grocery lists, and utility bills, carelessly discarded. I began sorting them into small plastic zipper bags, smoothing them out, categorizing them. This was my first step in a new system, one I had decided on last night in the feverish darkness, a system born of pain and quiet fury. I would still cook for now, I decided, but from this day forward, I would be writing down exactly how much every meal cost to make, logging the ingredients, the effort. I didn't mention that I had also dug out the copy of the house contract from 2018, the one detailing my initial $30,000 contribution and the subsequent $150,000 I'd wired for renovations over the years. I found it in the back of the storage closet, tucked away and forgotten, sealed it in a fresh plastic sleeve for safekeeping. When the kitchen was spotless, gleaming with a sterile cleanliness that mirrored the emptiness I felt inside, I walked into my room and reached for the old leather suitcase tucked high on the closet shelf. It had belonged to my husband, filled with the scent of old paper and pipe tobacco. I'd never had the heart to throw it out. Over the years, I'd added all kinds of things to it. Faded photos, David's old school awards, the tiny wool socks I'd knit for Leo the year he was born, and a stack of bank statements and mortgage payment slips I'd quietly saved just in case. I pulled out the one on top, a record of the $150,000 I had transferred to David over the years, the memo lines detailing house renovation fund and property upgrade. I printed out a fresh copy of the initial down payment transfer receipt, the $30,000, and tucked it into a bright yellow folder I found in a desk drawer. On the cover, I stuck a simple note: "Money I paid, don't forget." Later that afternoon, feeling a strange sense of purpose, I went to the grocery store, but this time I bought only what I needed: my prescription refill for my blood pressure and a small, pre-packaged meal for one. When I walked in, Kayla was leaning against the kitchen doorway, her phone in hand, her eyes going straight to the small bag in my hand. "You didn't get eggs?" she asked, her voice tinged with accusation. "I forgot," I said, a simple statement of fact, devoid of apology. She frowned. "We were going to start giving Leo more eggs this week." Before she could finish, I had already tucked the medication into my bedside drawer, hung the small shopping bag behind my bedroom door, and headed into my room. The door clicked shut behind me. From the kitchen, I could still hear her muttering, the words carrying clearly through the thin walls. "Helen, your memory is really getting worse lately." I sat down on the edge of my bed and opened the bright yellow folder again, the one with the note about the money I paid. On top, I stuck a new, larger note, written in bold letters: "Today, the clock starts." A faint burnt smell drifted from the kitchen. I didn't move. The soft hiss of boiling soup reached me through the walls. It wasn't until David's voice rang out, impatient again, "Mom, is dinner ready yet?" that I finally stood up to turn off the stove. That's when Kayla finally spoke, her tone as lazy and entitled as ever, as if the question had just occurred to her between scrolls. "Oh, right, Martha. Didn't you say some old co-worker of yours asked you to help with a stage thing? You're not actually thinking about doing that, are you?" She paused, looking up from her phone with a dismissive expression. "I mean, at your age, what help could you even be? And it's so far away." Oakhaven was small. The community centre theatre was barely 10 minutes away. "Where would you even stay?" She paused again, her gaze sweeping around the kitchen, the unspoken implication hanging heavy in the air. "You should just stay here and help with Leo. I mean, if we do end up moving closer to a better school across town, what would you even do here all by yourself?" I stood at the sink, rinsing the dishes, the water running, warm against my hands. I didn't say a word. She was already talking about me being left behind, about this house, the house I helped pay for, not being for me, not being my home in their future plans. Her voice floated on, oblivious to my silence. "I told David this place won't make sense for us if Leo starts school across town. You keeping the house would just be pointless." She was saying I'd have nowhere to go. I didn't argue. I didn't answer. I simply looked over at her through the kitchen doorway, where she was still engrossed in her phone, and smiled. She didn't notice. She had no idea I had already replied to Clara's email the night before, sitting right here at this table, the silence of the house wrapped around me. "I'm in." That was all I wrote. Simple. Final. I didn't hesitate for a second when I hit send. Clara responded almost immediately, her enthusiasm bubbling through the email. "Fantastic. Our first production meeting is next week. You can help us test out the lighting and prop layouts. We'll pay hourly." I had built sets for over 30 years, back in my factory days, and my part-time passion project. I'd hauled lumber, hammered frames until my arms ached, sketched backdrops by hand under harsh workshop lights. There wasn't a single person in that theatre community who would ever say Martha couldn't handle it, couldn't keep up. But I had no intention of explaining any of that to Kayla. She didn't need to know what I was still capable of. She just needed to wake up one morning, realize the house was quiet, and wonder to herself, Where did Martha go? After dinner, David took Leo to his karate class. Kayla stayed on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Halfway through a video, she suddenly glanced up, her attention snagged by something mundane. Martha, hey, I was wondering if I could ask you a quick favor. She tested the waters, a casual request that held a familiar undercurrent of expectation. I've got a little get-together with some girlfriends tomorrow. Could you pick Leo up from school? I asked David, but there's some emergency at work and he can't get away. I was unloading the dishwasher, drying each plate with a clean cloth, my movement steady. Sure, I said simply. She exhaled in relief. Great, thank you. I walked into the living room and, as if it were part of my routine, pulled a few crumpled snack wrappers from between the couch cushions, tossing them into the trash. You're pretty thorough. I'll give you that, she said, half distracted by her phone. I turned to her and smiled, a slow, knowing smile. Yeah, I said softly. I remember more than you think. She blinked, momentarily confused by the comment, but I didn't elaborate. What she didn't know was that I hadn't stopped keeping track. Every grocery refill, every dollar spent on household needs, David's full bank account name and number noted down. Every single time Chloe handed me something to just take care of real quick. Even the package she asked me to mail last week, addressed to her sister, I'd taken a picture of the sender's name, mine. I didn't ask her why she used my name. I just quietly began reclaiming everything that had ever been filed, signed, or borrowed under my name. These days, whenever she asked me to do her a favor, I smiled and nodded, agreeing. And whenever she assumed I had no other choice, nowhere else to be, I made sure the key to the front door was in my pocket, a quiet symbol of my impending exit. She thought I had nowhere to go, no options. But what she didn't realize was I'd already gone farther than she could imagine, building a new path, a new life, piece by piece, right under her nose. The next morning, while Chloe was out having brunch with friends, and David was at the office, I slipped on a pair of worn-in walking shoes, slung a canvas tote over my shoulder, and quietly stepped out the door. The Oakhaven community players had invited me to watch a rehearsal that day, just to get a feel for the space, the energy. Winter mornings in Oakhaven were always damp and cold, the kind of chill that wrapped around your neck and made you walk a little faster. I hunched my shoulders against it and headed toward the community center building. A faded banner hung at the front entrance. Theater Revival Project, Rebuild Together. Clara was already waiting outside, a warm, welcoming presence. When she saw me, her arms opened wide in a genuine embrace. Martha, you haven't changed a bit. I smiled, returning the hug. Oh, I've changed, I said, my voice quiet. My mind's clearer. My hands might be slower. She laughed, a warm, familiar sound, and led me inside, chatting as we went, pointing out the stage zones, the antiquated lighting rigs, the fresh-faced kids managing props and painting flats. What we really need, she said, her expression turning serious, is someone who knows what to look for, someone who knows when to tighten a bolt before it squeaks during a scene, or when to add a second layer of tape, even if the first one looks fine. The kind of person who just knows how to make things hold together. I nodded slowly, my eyes sweeping across the wooden frames and painted flats, structures as familiar to me as my own kitchen drawers, maybe even more so. No, this wasn't the kitchen where I'd spent the last decade scrubbing dishes and cooking meals, without thanks, feeling invisible, but I knew how to make this space hold steady, how to build something real and functional, just like I'd held up that house for 8 years alone, with hands that never let it fall, even when my heart was breaking. When I came home at noon, the house was empty, quiet except for the persistent drip from the kitchen faucet. I unpacked the small bag of groceries I'd picked up on the way back. Nothing much, just a few vegetables, some cheese, food for one. I carefully filed the receipts into the labeled plastic folders I'd prepared ahead of time, jotting down notes on how I planned to use each item, the meal it would become. Then I turned on the old laptop and created a new spreadsheet file. Walker Adams Household, Informal Expense Log, Private Record, was the name I gave it. I started inputting everything I'd documented so far. Chloe's package I mailed for her, David's request for help ordering new sneakers, along with the size and product link, the last refrigerator restock, including the date and full item list. Every casual favor, every small expense, every assumed task came with a timestamp, a note, sometimes even a screenshot. This wasn't anger, not anymore. It wasn't resentment, though that had fueled the beginning. It was a record of labor, of contribution, full, precise, and undeniably mine. After dinner that evening, I was washing the dishes. Chloe finished eating, scraped her plate into the trash, dumped the last spoonful of chicken soup down the sink, and walked off without even glancing at me or offering to help. As she dried her hands on a paper towel, she tossed a casual remark over her shoulder, her voice flat. "So, did you really not find any eggs, or did you just forget?" I dried the lid of a pot, my movements slow, deliberate. "The store I went to was out," I replied evenly. "I kept the receipt. It's written on there." She didn't respond, but I heard it. That little edge of doubt, of suspicion in her voice. She was starting to notice the shifts, the small deviations from the established routine. Later that night, after Leo had fallen asleep, I sat at the dining table, laptop open again, the screen a soft glow in the quiet house. I logged the day's receipts line by line. Lunch, chicken breast plus pea mash. Ingredients, 15 and 20 talons. As I hit enter, the floorboards creaked on the stairs. Chloe came down, her footsteps unusually light, like she didn't want to be noticed. She stood behind me for a moment before finally speaking, her voice hesitant. "You've been logging all this. What for?" I didn't turn around. I simply reached out and closed the window against the damp Oakhaven chill. "I just want things to be clear," I said. She took a sharp breath, her voice rising, losing its hesitant edge. "Are you checking up on us? Keeping a tally? You think we owe you now?" I looked up at her then, meeting her gaze calmly. "I'm not keeping track of you," I said softly. "I'm keeping track of what I've done." She stood there, her eyes fixed on the glowing screen, a dawning, uncomfortable understanding spreading across her face. "You're saving this just in case, right?" she said, her tone colder now, accusing. "In case one day I need it," I said, neither confirming nor denying, simply stating a potential reality. She let out a bitter, humorless laugh and turned back toward the stairs. The creak of the old wood echoed through the quiet house like a warning shot. I locked the document with a password and shut the laptop. My fingers hovered on the edge of the table for a few seconds before slowly pulling away, a physical detachment mirroring the emotional one that was taking place. After lunch the next day, I wiped down the kitchen counter, my movements precise. Chloe was sprawled on the couch, phone in hand, munching on chips while chatting with a friend on speaker. Her voice, light and dismissive, carried easily. "She's been acting so weird lately, keeping records, snapping photos, even recording audio. You think she's planning to sue us or something?" A short, easy laugh, amused, as if she were recounting a funny little misunderstanding. God, I made one comment about her being stingy, and she flipped. At the dining table, I finished copying down today's grocery list, then stood up and headed to the kitchen to marinate some beef for dinner. From behind me, she called out, her voice louder now, a command. "Martha, make sure you cook enough steak tonight. David loves it." A beat later, another instruction. "And don't salt the eggs this time. Leo said they were too salty." "Okay," I replied softly, the word barely audible. Just then, David came down the stairs, flipping through his wallet, a frown on his face. "Mom, did you take my credit card?" I didn't answer that question directly. I looked up and asked evenly, my voice calm. "The last time you used that card? It was mine, wasn't it? You used it to buy Leo that new game controller last month, right?" He paused, caught off guard by the unexpected precision of my memory, by the quiet accusation in my tone. For once, he had nothing to say, no quick excuse ready. I stepped into the kitchen and opened the fridge, pulling out the beef I'd marinated the night before. Just as I turned toward the sink to rinse it, Chloe got up from the couch and tossed a bag of dirty laundry onto the chair beside the kitchen doorway. Martha, could you throw this in with the wash? We're heading out soon. I stared at the bag for a few seconds, then turned back to look at the sink. The water was already boiling in the pot I was about to rinse. Steam fogged up my glasses. I pulled them off and wiped the lenses slowly with the edge of my sleeve, my movements deliberate. Then she added, her voice laced with irritation. By the way, have you been a little moody lately? David says you've barely been speaking. Look, we get that you're tired, but if you don't do these things, who will? David was still standing by the dining room door, thumbing through his phone, his face closed off. Yeah, Mom, he added, his voice flat. Don't make everything so emotional. This isn't a company. No one's asking for itemized reports. I kept wiping my glasses, slower now, seeing them both through the blur of steam and tears I refused to shed. Mom, what are you doing? Kayla asked, a hint of genuine annoyance, maybe even fear, in her voice. I didn't answer. The pot slipped from my hand, whether accidentally or not, I couldn't be sure, and crashed into the sink with a loud clang. Boiling water splashed, some drops landing on Chloe's new dress. She jumped back with a yelp, her expression twisting instantly from annoyance to fury. Did you do that on purpose? I looked up at her then, really looked, seeing her not just as my daughter-in-law, but as a stranger, entitled and selfish. Kayla, I said quietly, my voice even, steady. Did it ever occur to you that this pot, maybe it was never mine to wash in the first place? She froze, the fury draining from her face, replaced by shock. David's brow furrowed, confused. What's that supposed to mean, Mom? I set the cloth down beside the sink, my voice calm, resolute. I mean, you eat without saying thank you. You put bills and purchases in my name. Now you're tossing dirty pots and laundry my way, like it's just my job, my expected duty. I've cooked more meals, washed more clothes, and paid for more things over these 8 years than either of you have managed in your lives. But I'm not your maid. Kayla opened her mouth, a sharp retort already forming. Helen, are you what? Menopausal? The casual cruelty, the immediate dismissal of my feelings as a hormonal issue, was breathtaking. I let out a sudden sharp laugh, a release of pent-up frustration and pain. It held no humor. Whether I am or not doesn't matter, I said, meeting her gaze directly. What matters is this. Starting today, I won't be paying for your expenses anymore. Not the utilities, not the groceries, nothing but my own. And I'm not washing anything that doesn't belong to me. David's tone sharpened, a flicker of panic in his voice. Mom, come on, don't be like this. I'm calmer than either of you, I said, the truth of it settling deep in my bones. Silence dropped heavy over the kitchen, thick and suffocating. From the stairs, a small voice broke through the tension. Leo peeked down, his eyes wide, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Grandma, are you mad? I walked over and gently smoothed his hair, my heart aching for his innocence caught in the middle. No, sweetheart, I said softly. I just finally understood something. What? He asked, his little face earnest, that it's time I take care of me. After that tense dinner, where I ate the small prepackaged meal I had bought for myself earlier, I went back to my room, untied my apron, and sat on the edge of the bed. I picked up my phone. The message from Clara was still open, a beacon of possibility. Rehearsals officially begin next week. You'll be managing the backstage props area. The equipment's a little outdated, but you're more reliable than any gear we've got. I typed back, I'll be there on time. Tuesday morning at 7:30 a.m. Tuesday morning at 7:30, I slipped into a navy blue work shirt I hadn't worn in years, tied my hair back into a low, practical ponytail, and grabbed my old canvas tool bag from the back of the closet. From upstairs, Chloe called out, her voice colored with suspicion. Martha, where are you going? You've been out a lot lately. Standing by the front door, I slipped on my worn-in walking shoes. Just taking care of something, I said. I'll be back before dinner. She didn't press. Lately, she'd grown quieter, more cautious around me, especially after David had caught a glimpse of my expense ledger on the dining table the other night and muttered, Mom, don't be so paranoid. That was when I realized they'd rather believe I was overreacting, losing my mind, than face the fact that, I had started waking up that the invisible maid was becoming visible. The Oak Haven Community Theatre sat behind a modest neighborhood center, a simple building with a faded banner. The stage inside was an old black box. The lighting rigs looked like something salvaged from the 1990s. But the moment I stepped inside, everything snapped into focus, humming with a different kind of energy. There were no dirty dishes here, no utility bills with my name attached, no one telling me I should do this or should do that. This was a space where work had value, where skill was appreciated. Clara came over and gave me a big hug. "Martha, you haven't changed a bit." I grinned. "Might be because I'm not wearing an apron," I said, and she laughed. We started with the first flat, just the frame, and a curled-up bit of old wallpaper. I sealed the edge with tape, my fingers remembering the familiar texture, while one of the younger assistants fumbled nearby. He watched me work, then let out a low whistle. "Wow, you're really good at this." "This job doesn't take talent," I said, sealing the tape. "Just practice." He sighed. "I don't think I'll last 3 months." I smiled. "Then you've never needed the paycheck bad enough." Before lunch, Clara handed me a signed time slip and a $20 coffee gift card. "We've got another production in the spring. We're thinking about offering you lead set designer." She wasn't worried about my age. "If you show up, Martha, I'll give you a shot." I tucked the envelope away, feeling something I hadn't in years, self-worth, not validation from others. That night, I came home to a note from Kayla. "We went out. Figure out dinner yourself." For once, I wasn't hurt. I felt light. So, I treated myself to dinner at a diner, ordering a single patty burger and a cup of weak coffee, savoring the quiet solitude and the simple act of being served. I learned to be kind to myself. The kitchen was dark and quiet when I got back. The sink was empty, but a few stray crumbs lay scattered on the counter, a silent accusation of my absence. I ignored them and went straight to my room. I opened the new expense log on my laptop, the soft glow illuminating the room. I added the cost of my diner meal. This wasn't about being petty. It was about redefining my boundaries, itemizing the cost of my life separate from theirs. It was about acknowledging that my needs had a price, and from now on, I was paying it myself. Over the next few weeks, the shifts in the household dynamic became more pronounced. I was at the theatre 3 mornings a week now, sometimes more if they needed extra hands before a big rehearsal. The air in the house grew thinner, stretched tight with unspoken grievances. Chloe stopped asking me to pick up Leo from school. Instead, I'd hear her making frantic phone calls, trying to find a friend or neighbor available. Sometimes, Leo would come home looking tired, mentioning he'd had to wait ages at the pickup spot. My heart ached, but I knew this was part of the process. They needed to understand the gap my absence created, not just in chores, but in their relied-upon convenience. My grocery shopping became a minimalist art. A handful of vegetables, a small portion of meat, a loaf of bread, my blood pressure medication. I bought my own tea bags, my own carton of milk. David and Chloe still bought groceries, but the pantry shelves started to look emptier, the fruit bowl less abundant. I saw them eating more takeout, more convenience meals. The casual, "Martha, we're out of milk," or "Martha, did you remember to get cereal?" were replaced by a strained silence or a frustrated huff when they discovered the shortage themselves. My ledger grew, documenting each item I bought only for myself, each trip to the pharmacy, each purchase that wasn't for the collective household. One evening, David came home looking particularly stressed. He slumped onto the couch, loosening his tie. "Rough day?" I asked, my voice neutral. He just grunted. After a few minutes, he spoke, his voice low. "Chloe's been difficult lately, always complaining about how much there is to do around here." He paused, looking at me. "She says you used to, well, keep things running." I continued folding my small pile of laundry. "Things run differently now," I said simply. He shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, well, it's a lot." "It always was," I replied, meeting his gaze. "You just didn't see it." He didn't have a response to that. He just looked away, fiddling with his phone. I knew he still didn't truly get it. He saw my service as a natural extension of my role, not as labor I performed. He saw my withdrawal as a personal slight, a deliberate inconvenience, rather than a necessary boundary. At the theatre, it was different. The work was physical, sometimes tiring, but it was also invigorating. Building the flats, painting the backdrops, organizing the props, it was all tangible, visible work. Clara and the others treated me with respect. They asked for my opinion, listened to my suggestions. Old Mr. Henderson, who handled the lighting, would share stories from past productions, his eyes twinkling with shared history. The young stagehands, initially intimidated, started coming to me for advice, asking how to tie a secure knot or patch a torn flat. I found a quiet satisfaction in teaching them, in passing on skills I'd honed over decades. It wasn't just the work, it was the camaraderie, the sense of belonging that had been absent from my home for so long. One afternoon, after a particularly productive rehearsal, where we'd managed to build a complex rotating platform, Clara pulled me aside. "Martha, the grant came through for the next production, the one in the spring. The board wants to bring you on officially. We can offer you a contract, a decent hourly wage, even a small stipend for materials." She looked at me expectantly. "It's not retirement money, but it's steady work, and you're invaluable." I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with fever. "That would be wonderful, Clara," I said, my voice a little thick. "Think about it," she said, though her smile told me she knew my answer. "It's a commitment, of course. Long hours leading up to the show, and you'd be working closely with the director and designers." "I can handle it," I said firmly. I knew I could. I had handled far more with far less appreciation for years. Coming home that night, the air in the house felt colder than usual. Chloe was on the phone in the living room, her voice tight. "No, Mom, she's still being weird, logging everything. It's like she thinks we're stealing from her." She lowered her voice, but I could still hear. "I don't know what's gotten into her. Maybe it is her age." I walked past the living room without acknowledging her, the familiar pain a dull ache. Let them think I was losing my mind. It was easier for them than confronting the truth. In my room, I opened the yellow folder with the property records. I looked at the figures: $30,000 for the down payment, $150,000 for renovations, a total of $180,000. It wasn't just money. It was years of saving, years of working, years of sacrifice. It was the foundation of their life, built on my back. I picked up my laptop and opened the expense log. Below the entries for groceries and medication, I added a new section: contributions to property value. I carefully typed in the initial down payment and the renovation costs, along with the dates of the transfers. I attached scanned copies of the bank statements and the contract. The file size grew, a digital monument to my unacknowledged contribution. The tension finally broke one Saturday morning. David and Chloe were arguing in the kitchen about who was supposed to take Leo to his soccer practice. Voices rose, frustrations boiled over. I was sitting at the dining table, updating my ledger. "This is ridiculous," Chloe snapped. "There's just too much to do, and Mom used to handle everything." "Well, she's not handling it now, is she?" David retorted. "And frankly, this whole accounting thing she's doing, it's driving me crazy." Chloe's eyes landed on me, a sudden, sharp focus. "It's all her fault," she accused, pointing a finger. "Ever since she started this rebellion, nothing works. The house is a mess, we're fighting constantly, and she just sits there with her little notebook." I closed my laptop slowly, the click echoing in the sudden silence. "It's not a little notebook, Chloe," I said, my voice steady. "It's a record of 8 years of unpaid labor and financial contribution." David stared at me, his face pale. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I opened the yellow folder and slid the property records across the table towards them. "This house," I said, tapping the contract. "The down payment, the renovations, all of it. My savings, my borrowed money, $180,000. Chloe's eyes widened, darting from me to the documents and back. That's not all yours, she stammered. David put money in. Yes, I agreed calmly. He paid the mortgage, after I helped you with the down payment and made sure the house was livable. After I paid for your wedding so you wouldn't start with debt. After I supported you both when you were starting out. I slid the expense log towards them, the screen still showing the contributions to property value section. And this, I continued, opening another section. Groceries, utilities, clothes for Leo, repairs around the house, things you assumed were just covered. Things I covered, for years, without question, without thanks. David picked up the laptop, scrolling through the detailed entries. His face grew paler with each line. Chloe looked from the documents to me, a mixture of shock and fear in her eyes. You're keeping track of everything, she whispered. Yes, I said again, my voice quiet but firm. Because when I was just doing it, it was invisible. When I stopped, it became a problem. So now it's visible. Every single thing. Silence descended again, heavier this time, laced with the weight of undeniable facts. Leo, sensing the tension, had crept into the room and was standing by the door, his lower lip trembling. What does this mean? David finally asked, his voice strained. I looked at him, at my son, a stranger in his own home. It means, I said, that I'm not just Mom who lives here. I'm a co-investor, and I'm no longer a free employee. Chloe found her voice, sharp and defensive. So what? You want rent? You want to charge us? No, I said. I want to be seen. I want my contribution to be acknowledged. And I want to live in a home where I am treated with respect, not as a servant. I stood up, gathering my papers. I have a contract with the Oakhaven Community Players, I said, deliberately changing the subject, introducing a tangible piece of my new life. I'll be working as the lead set designer for their spring production. It's a paid position. David and Chloe exchanged stunned glances. This was not the frail, complaining woman they were used to. This was someone else, someone with plans, with purpose, with a life outside of their demands. Lead set designer, David echoed, disbelief in his voice. Mum, you haven't done that in years. I have, I corrected him gently. Just not here. I walked over to Leo and knelt down, pulling him into a hug. Grandma's going to be busy, sweetheart, I murmured, kissing his hair. But I'll still be here for you, okay? He just nodded, clinging to me. Leaving them standing in the stunned silence of the dining room, I went to my room. I felt a deep sadness for what had been lost, the easy affection, the unquestioning bond I thought I had with my son. But beneath the sadness was a core of steel. I had finally spoken my truth. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, not to make breakfast for anyone else, but to prepare for my day at the theatre. I made my own cup of tea, ate my small bowl of oatmeal, and quietly slipped out the door. The damp Oakhaven air felt crisp and clean against my face. As I walked towards the community centre, a sense of anticipation filled me. I wasn't just going to work. I was going to a place where I was valued, where I was visible, where I was building something that was truly mine. The house behind me was still my address, but it no longer felt like my entire world. My world was expanding, piece by piece, built with my own hands, on my own terms. And the clock, the one I had started ticking, was still running. It was time to finish building. The confrontation, instead of clearing the air, felt more like an earthquake had rattled the house, leaving unseen cracks in the foundation. The initial shock on David and Chloe's faces quickly morphed into something colder, a simmering resentment. They didn't mention the ledger or the house contribution directly for a few days. Instead, the passive aggression escalated. Doors were left open when they knew I preferred them closed. Lights were left on unnecessarily. Chores that they might have occasionally attempted before were now pointedly ignored. The sink would accumulate dishes until David or Chloe absolutely needed a specific pot. Then one of them would wash only that item, leaving the rest. The laundry basket overflowed. Leo, bless his heart, noticed the change. He'd follow me into the kitchen when I was making my solitary meals, watching with wide, curious eyes. "Grandma, why are you only making one sandwich?" he asked one afternoon. Because this is just for me, sweetheart, I explained gently, spreading peanut butter on a single slice of bread. Don't you want to eat with us? His voice was small, confused. My heart twisted. Sometimes I will, honey, but sometimes it's nice to eat what I want, when I want. I knew it wasn't a full explanation, but how could I articulate the complex dance of resentment, entitlement, and self-preservation to a 6-year-old? I still read him stories at bedtime, still tucked him in with a kiss, still helped him find misplaced toys. My love for him was a constant, a warm ember in the chilling atmosphere of the house, but I was no longer his default, round-the-clock caretaker. At the theatre, my world was taking shape with satisfying solidity. The old black box wasn't fancy, but it was filled with energy and purpose. My first major task as lead set designer was sketching out the plans for the spring comedy. I spread large sheets of paper on a makeshift table backstage, the smell of pencil lead and sawdust, a comforting change from the faint scent of stale takeout at home. Clara introduced me to the director, a woman named Eleanor, with a shock of bright red hair and an infectious laugh. Eleanor had a clear vision for the play's look, and we spent hours bouncing ideas back and forth, translating concepts into practical designs. We need a multi-level set for the final scene, Eleanor said, gesturing enthusiastically. Something that feels chaotic but is structurally sound. Can we do that? I smiled, a genuine, full smile that reached my eyes. We can do more than that, I told her, already sketching ramps, platforms, and hidden doors. This was the kind of problem-solving I thrived on, the kind of intricate work my hands remembered, even if my brain felt tired sometimes. Mr. Henderson, the lighting technician, would lean over my shoulder, offering technical advice on how the set design might affect the lighting plan. You've got a good eye, Martha, he'd say, his voice gruff but kind. You see the whole picture, not just the pretty bits. The young stagehands, like the earnest assistant from my first day, were eager to learn. I showed them how to reinforce frames with corner blocks, how to safely operate the power tools, how to mix paint to get just the right shade. There was a quiet satisfaction in mentoring them, seeing them gain confidence as their skills grew. They weren't just doing chores, they were learning a craft. The theatre wasn't just a workplace, it was becoming a community. After rehearsals, we'd sometimes gather at the little diner I'd discovered, talking about the play, about life in Oakhaven, about everything and nothing. I learned about Clara's grandchildren, Mr. Henderson's prize-winning roses, the dreams of the young actors and crew. I felt seen, heard, and valued in a way I hadn't in years. This wasn't a family bound by blood, but by shared passion, and it felt remarkably like home. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at the house remained thick with unspoken accusations. Chloe made pointed comments about the grocery bill whenever she saw me unpacking my small bag of food. Wow, look at all that, she'd say, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Must be nice not having to feed a family. It is, I'd reply, my voice calm, putting my few items into the fridge or pantry, separate from their overflowing, disorganized stores. David started leaving utility bills on the dining table, making sure I saw them. Just so you know what things cost, Mom, he'd mutter. I'd pick them up, look at the totals, and place them back down. Yes, David, I'd say. I know what things cost. I paid them for years. He bristled. That was different. You lived here. You used the electricity. And I cooked, and I cleaned, and I did your laundry, and I took care of your son day and night, I countered, my voice still even. Consider the difference payment for services rendered. This kind of exchange became more frequent, short, sharp bursts of tension, followed by icy silence. They still hadn't grasped the magnitude of my contribution, preferring to frame it as me suddenly becoming difficult or stingy. It was easier than admitting their dependence and their lack of gratitude. My financial documentation continued. I refined the spreadsheet, adding categories for groceries, mine versus shared, utilities, tracking usage patterns if possible, though estimated, household supplies, Leo's expenses, clothes, school supplies, activities I contributed to in the past. I even started tracking my time spent on household tasks before my rebellion and assigning a hypothetical hourly wage based on standard cleaning or childcare rates in Oakhaven. The numbers were staggering, illustrating just how much invisible labor I had provided. It solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about money, it was about quantifying my life's work, making the invisible visible. I also began quietly looking into my options. Online searches for small apartments in Oakhaven, calls to a local real estate agent, asking about the market value of the house and the process of selling. I learned that, as a co-owner, I had rights. I couldn't be simply asked to leave, especially having contributed so significantly to the purchase and maintenance. I could potentially force a sale or demand a buyout of my share. The thought of leaving the house, the physical structure I had poured so much into, was painful, but the thought of staying under the current conditions was becoming unbearable. The grant money arrived, a small but significant deposit, into my newly opened separate bank account. Seeing that number, knowing it was payment for my work, my skill, filled me with a quiet strength. I used some of it to buy new tools for the theatre, better quality paintbrushes, a sturdy tape measure, work gloves that fit my hands perfectly. Simple things, but they felt like investments in my future. One evening, I was working late at the theatre, helping the set painting crew finish a large backdrop. The air was thick with paint fumes, and we were all tired but laughing, united by the shared goal. When I got home, close to 10 o'clock, the house was quiet. A few dirty dishes were in the sink, and the living room light was on, though no one was there. I made my tea and sat at the dining table, pulling out my laptop. David came down the stairs looking rumpled. "Mom, you're home late." "Working," I replied, opening my expense log. He sighed, rubbing his eyes. "Look, Mom, can we talk?" "We are talking," I said, not looking up. He hesitated, then pulled out a chair and sat opposite me. This whole thing with the money and the lists," he said, his voice softer than usual, almost pleading. "It's making things really difficult. Chloe is miserable." "And I was just ecstatic for the last 8 years?" I asked, finally meeting his gaze. He flinched. "That's not fair. We appreciate you, Mum. You know that." "Do I?" I asked, my voice low. "When have you ever shown it? When have you ever lifted a finger without being asked? When have you ever said thank you for a meal, or a clean shirt, or a spotless house? When have you ever stopped to consider that I might be tired, or sick, or just want one day to myself?" He looked down at the table. We got used to it." "Exactly," I said. "You got used to my labor being free, to my needs being invisible. And when I stopped providing that free labor, when I made my needs visible, I became a problem." I slid the laptop towards him, opening the section detailing the household expenses. "Look at this, David. Look at what I've been paying for. Food, electricity, water, repairs. It's not just about the down payment. It's the day-to-day cost of keeping this house running, a cost you conveniently overlooked." He scrolled through the entries, his face growing pale again. He saw the dates, the amounts, the detailed notes. He couldn't dismiss it as paranoia or menopause anymore. It was all there, undeniable. "We can't afford all of this on our own," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "I know," I said. "That's why I paid for it." I paused, then continued, the words measured and deliberate. "I've been looking into things, David, my options. As a co-owner of this house, I have rights. I can ask for my investment back." His head snapped up, fear flashing in his eyes. "What? You mean, you want us to buy you out?" "Or sell," I said. "Either way, my significant financial contribution needs to be addressed." Chloe appeared in the doorway, drawn by the serious tone of the conversation. She took in David's pale face and the laptop screen between us. "What's going on?" she demanded. "Mom thinks we owe her money," David said, his voice strained. "I don't think it," I corrected him. "I know it, and I have the records to prove it." I looked at Chloe. "My savings account was emptied for the down payment on this house. Money I'd saved my entire working life. I borrowed to pay for renovations. I paid for your wedding. All so you could have a good start." Chloe's face hardened. We paid the mortgage. We've been paying into it for years. And I paid for everything else, I said, my voice rising slightly, losing some of its calm. While you treated me like the help. While you complained when I was sick. While you talked about selling my home out from under me and leaving me with nowhere to go. The word home hung in the air, heavy with contention. Was this truly my home? A place where I was tolerated but not cherished, used but not appreciated. So what do you want? Chloe demanded, crossing her arms, defensive. I want what's fair, I said. I want my investment recognized. And I want to live my life with dignity, whether that's here, with boundaries and respect, or somewhere else.